I think after that you went back to playwriting.
I did.
Yeah, and I think one of the
But it's not to that editor's credit. I was going to anyway.
That is true.
Yeah,
and I think that the next week, one of the major works that you wrote after that was also coordinated with Ziqian, coincidentally, which was sex violence, blood, gore.
Yes.
Which TNS did. And this piece, ironically, also dealt with censorship. Yeah, and TNS very cleverly worked around it, I think. If I'm not wrong, they read out what was supposed to have happened. Yeah,
two and a half scenes, I think, that was censored. It was a play with something like 6 scenes.
Yeah, it's a collection of vignettes, sort of, various short scenes.
So Jeff Chen basically came up to me and Ziqian one day and said, "Write a play," and we asked about what? These 4 words: sex, violence, blood, gore. So those were the 4 prompts that we had to start with. And so, yes, we wrote this scene.
This is the scene with the 2 British women, I think.
Correct.
Yeah. Who have designs on their servants.
So one of the scenes that they took out so we received, I think, the license only, very typical, right? It's still going on up till this day. Received license just a couple of days or even 1 day before performance itself. And then said, oh, you can perform this whole play, but 2 scenes you cannot do because we believe them to be religiously or racially inflammatory. So one of them was my scene, another was Ziqian's scene. Another was just a few lines in another scene, So that's why I say 2.5 scenes, So in Ziqian's scene, if I'm not wrong, it's about 2 housewives, and then they are looking opposite their block, and they are remarking about, oh, you see that boy? Yeah, I always see him. Why he like to masturbate so much? So, so it was a Chinese housewife and a Malay housewife. And then after talking about that guy a lot, it's not that they also started whatever, but they started talking about racial riots, and then started talking about, oh, if there's a riot that breaks out, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, can't remember. But my scene was in the future, I think in the year 2020.
With the robot, right?
Yeah, with the robot.
Yeah.
And what happened in my scene was that Malaysia had cut off Singapore's water supply in 2020. So Singapore was sending out explorers to the North Pole to drag back icebergs for fresh water. And they didn't like that. See, I don't know, maybe the mention of Malaysia and water supply sensitive, I don't know. So we got a letter from, at that point of time, they were called PELU, precursor to Media Development Authority.
The Public Entertainment Licensing Unit.
Which was under the police force, right? So we were like, oh, what's going to happen now? We can't do those 2 scenes. So TNS, I think mostly Alvin and Haresh, as well as Jeff Chen, the director, they decided, sorry, what's 3? Oh.
Oh, 30 minutes.
Okay. So they decided. So prompted the back. Yes, there were 3 of them: Haresh, Alvin, and Jeff. So, yes, it was a collective decision. So they decided, okay, we'll stage the play, but what we're going to do is those plays that they told us to take out, we will still do them, but we will do them at high speed. Because we blocked them already, right? Don't waste, rehearse already. So do them at high speed and then just blast music over it. So the audience will know which are the scenes that are censored, right? And I think it's an important strategy. Always make censorship visible. Always make it visible. That's why even when it comes to film censorship, a lot of filmmakers still want to tell MDA, you want to cut Ken.
Similar to Ken Kwek's Sex, Violence, Family Values.
Turn it black. Have a black screen. You can't watch this because of MDA, something like that. Make it clear to consumers what they're missing out.
And I think there was an interesting decision on, because I think the Necessary Stage was also quite influenced by this New York group called the Worcester Group. And they also were subject to certain, not political censorship, but the estates of certain playwrights would not allow them to stage certain parts of the play. So they would also do it in gibberish, or just also make it very clear to their audiences.
That there was some kind of intervention, right, by the censors. So that wasn't the only thing they did. They also printed out the scripts that were not supposed to be performed, but Pelu didn't say anything about not printing them and distributing. So we distributed to those in the audience. And then somewhere in the middle of the play, there was a voiceover, and then we interrupt this play, so the house lights came on, and then I think Go Sulin, who was the general manager at the point of time, she read the letter from Pelu. in the middle of the play. And it was a very funny letter because it's like, oh, you have license to do this play, 2 scenes take out. And it ended with, you can pay for your license by nets or cash. So we read the whole thing in its entirety. And every night, people would just laugh at that because it's so transactional, censorship. They make it seem as if it's like you're just paying a fine or something like that. But there's actual violence, of course, that's committed when you censor.
Yeah. And it's been also, I think, quite interesting sort of tracking the arc of your work. I think as you move into, at this point, you're going into the early 2000s, I was just looking at the plays you had written, and I think early on, they kind of challenged, they confronted this idea of Singapore identity. And after that, you began to move into sort of ideas of historical amnesia and also cultural memory. So looking at Singapore history from a different vantage point. So looking at narratives that maybe were not given a spotlight. So like in this case, Asian Boys Volume 1, which gives a platform to queer history and also queer stories. And you also did your poetry collection, which is a history of amnesia. And there's Mengapa ISA, I think is a performance lecture. What sort of prompted this re-looking at history from a different perspective?
Right, wow. Actually, the genesis of some of these plays you make it sound quite intellectual. But this was hanging out with Jeff Chen, and then him telling me, I would like you to adapt August Strindberg's Dream Play, And I said, okay, sure. So I did that, and I decided to sort of queer the whole, because the whole thing was very campy to me, that Scandinavian angst, there's a certain level, there's a point when you read, and then you realize, oh my god, this is pure camp. When they have lines like, oh, all humans must suffer. And they're all a bit mad, right? Strindberg or Schopenhauer, Ibsen. Depressed. So there's a point of time when all that gnashing of teeth and whatever becomes very camp. So I extracted that camp, and then we did this play. And then Jeff said, should we change the title also? Don't want Dream Play, And I said, what should it be? And he said, let's call it something sexy, like Cock Show or Dick Flick. But because I have a lot more class than Jeff, I went back and then just sort of surfed the internet. And then I thought, okay, maybe we can have that naughty, semi-pornographic kind of thing that he wants, but then can also have a double meaning innuendo. So Asian Boys Volume 1 can be the name of a very pornographic whatever, but it can also be the name of a play.
And I think during that period, there was this sort of research, a lot of work in Singapore. They were looking at ideas, issues of homosexuality or queer issues during that period. And we were, I know during our chat, we were also talking about how your more recent work has, you have been following the close of this trilogy in 2007. I think someone asked you why you hadn't written another gay play since. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, there was a 90s, in the papers, in the media, I think maybe 2000s onwards, there was suddenly this, what they call a whole rash of gay plays, right? Makes it sound like STD like that, right? rash of gay plays. But I don't know how to really account for that, than to think that there was some kind of loosening. But the way loosenings happen in Singapore is that, the first thing people might loosen up on is maybe sexuality or whatever, because it's not so politically threatening, and then later on maybe race, religion a little bit, and then after that, politics is like the final frontier in Singapore. So I also do feel that that kind of loosening up is one way for the state to adopt a certain facade of liberalization, So, hey, Singapore is not a nanny state anymore. Look at how many gay plays we have. Yeah. So I think it went during that time also. So there was a kind of visibility and around that time also, I think it was, it's so depressing to talk about it in this way, but with Singapore, it's really all about whether something is approved or not approved. It's all about the economy. right? And I think in the upper echelons, there was a book going around, Richard Florida's Creative Cities, that said something along the lines of, if you want a creative city, one of the ingredients is tolerance for homosexuality. Yeah. And then I think Goh Chok Tong came out and then made that statement about, oh, there are gay people in the civil service, you know? Let it be known that we are also aspire to be a creative city.
I think the Time magazine article was also about the same time.
I think so, yeah. About Singapore having fun, and I think that was around that period, yeah. So I think gay plays could also be used in this instrumental manner to project an image of a liberal, open, progressive Singapore, which makes me feel a bit dirty sometimes, you know, as an artist writer in Singapore, the ways in which the stuff that you do can be potentially co-opted by the state in service of international branding. How am I complicit in those things? You know, Singapore Day as well, right? So you roll out Kumar, and hey, look, you know, a drag queen is one of Singapore's most famous exports, you know, and then it's a kind of pink washing, right? So you have that, and then, but please don't mention anything about 377A or whatever, you know. Hey, we have Kumar! You know, look at us, we're open and liberal, so. Yeah.
And I think as your work has, you know, continued to evolve as well, you also look at, you know, move into reclaiming history. So you have work like Hotel, which tells 100 years in Singapore, stories that people may not have heard before. And then you also have GRC, which kind of flips the status quo in Singapore. So instead of looking for a minority Malay or Indian candidate for a GRC, you look for a minority Chinese candidate. And then you also have put sort of the Singaporean as a playwright in the spotlight. So you did Cooling Off Day, which is verbatim Testimonial Theatre, and or Cook a Bowl of Curry as well. So I found that quite interesting to look at, you know, Singaporean as playwright in your recent work.
Yeah, I think I went to verbatim theatre because I was a little sick of my own voice. So, and I felt it was important to hear what, let's say, the layman has to say about politics in Singapore. I felt the political play for a very long time. A lot of playwrights were using allegory, satire, you know, the metaphorical mode. And I know this is an interesting discussion that some playwrights have in Singapore. Eleanor Wong, for example, I think in an article where she was either interviewed or she wrote that article, she said she missed the days when the political play wasn't so on the nose, wasn't so blunt, when, you know, there would be all these metaphors, layers to unpack. But I personally feel that's making a virtue out of a necessity, you know, that those plays had to have that kind of codedness because that was the only way to get licenses for them, the only way to get censors to approve. So for verbatim theatre, I felt, okay, how do people talk about politics, you know, in a country that's in a sense been so depoliticized for so long, for people to not be part of the political process. I mean, we must remember that this watershed election was watershed because for once all the constituencies were contested. I mean, it's something completely new, right? In Singapore, actually we went through decades where there were just walkovers. There were years, so-called general elections, when a party would just be returned to power on nomination day because the rest of the seats were not contested. So after that long sleep of not having a political vocabulary, I thought it's important to just hear, how people can talk about politics. Not necessarily with metaphors, whatever, but what does it mean for them? What are their stakes as a citizen in political participation?
And it's quite interesting because I think you have a lot of issues that you want to bring out in the plays that you do. And, you know, one thing I've read while looking through, you know, various people looking at your work or evaluating your work is that, you know, you might have a soapbox that you want to stand on and use your characters as a sort of way to get an issue across. So how do you balance fleshing out a character as a three-dimensional sort of fully formed person, and also using the character as a conduit to bring out what you want to say.
Yeah, this is not easy sometimes. I have to say that sometimes I struggle with it. What if, let's say, the political convictions of a character is the same as mine? How do I then separate those two things and not, as you said, use a character as a kind of ventriloquism, right? Using it just for grandstanding. So sometimes it's not very easy. I mean, I try always to start writing a play from characters. So I find maybe when I was younger, I would think, okay, I want to write a play about racism. So that would be the starting point, But I realized that plays like that tend to have more soapboxy characters because you start off with an issue. Yeah. But if you always start off with characters, I mean, the issues, the plot, etc., all those things will fall in place later, I find, and you can ensure some kind of integrity for your character. Their character is not just a mouthpiece, that your character has got inner life, their character is also a product of his or her social environment.
Yeah. And I think, one of my personal favorites is Nadia, I think, because she embodies a lot of these conflicts, I guess, that she really battles with herself. And Nadia, as you see here, is about a young woman whose mother was a convert to Islam, and after her father passes away, her mother has
they had a divorce.
Divorce, sorry. Has kind of a crisis of faith. So how did
she falls in love with a Chinese man.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a bit of a reversal of that model where usually it's the children who want to get married, right? And they have parental objections. I thought it might be interesting to reverse that and have the daughter objecting to the parents' marriage on grounds of objecting to the parents' interreligious / interracial kind of marriage. Yeah.
How did you go about sort of shaping this work and building the various characters?
Yeah, so again, one day I was sitting with Neo Sui Lin, just having lunch or something. I look at her face for very long and I said, I wonder how you would look wearing a tudung. And she said, oh, why? I said, I just wonder, interesting, would you want to do that on stage? I said, and I think sometimes you start a play from an image, rather. I like these ways of studying plays, either from an image or character. Sometimes I realize when you want to write a play about an issue, you always have to ask yourself, why not write an essay? Why not write something else? Why the play? But there are things like images and characters which is not, you can't use the vehicle of an essay or even a poem. The play has to be the one.
Yeah. Got it. I think another thing I was noticing in your work was a very strong literary bent that you have. Not just the pantomimes that you've done for Wild Rice to sort of adapt classics like Sleeping Beauty or...
So honored you call them literary.
Or Cinderella. And then here, for Asian Boys Volume 3, you adapted Peculiar Chris.
Yes.
Quite a seminal work of... queer literature in Singapore. And then in another country, you also curated literary texts. Another country was a work by Wild Rice where Singapore actors perform literary texts from Malaysia and Malaysian actors perform literary texts from Singapore. So he curated the Singapore selection. So I guess literature is also quite a key element in the work that you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I do like all this kind of intertextual kind of work, interdisciplinary, where I think I acknowledge that my influences are, don't just come from within the theatre tradition.
Yeah.
So with Asian Boys 1 and 3, it was about Peculiar Chris, that novel by Johann S. Lee. Actually, previously, just now, Nadia was also an homage to Yasmin Ahmad. So I wrote actually that play in the same year she passed away, in July 2009. And I was really quite devastated. And for me, one of the ways to deal with that grief was to look at some of her old films. And one of the films was called Mu'alaf, which was about a convert. Mu'alaf is convert in Arabic, Malay. So that play became my way of responding to that film, and this play is something responding to a book, to a novel.
Okay. Got it. I think even things like Para with interlock. There are a lot of these little references that you see.
I think I come from a very writerly background. I cannot direct. I tried acting long time ago, but when you see better actors, you just know. You just know.
I mean, on that note, since you write in several forms, poetry, prose, the essay, the play, how do you know what form an idea or character will take? I mean, will it eventually be a character in a short story or on the stage? How does that work for you?
Yeah. Sometimes this kind of thing is intuition. It's hard to say whether there's a kind of guide or model, But I can say though that, I mentioned just now something. If I suppose I start off with a character, then for me it will make sense. It might be a play lah. Sometimes an image might be a poem, or even a play. So and sometimes it's a line, that's in my head, and then that can take on whatever form.
Okay, got it. And I think another form of writing, which are very voluminous, in your output, would be your Facebook. He has 18,000 followers.
Still less than Calvin Klein.
And I think in recent years, it's really been a source of very intimate writing. Maybe observations by your mother. Really lovely scenes, or linguistic kind of dissections such as this, where you did a series on the national anthem and what it meant. And I'm curious, as because I think you used to blog and then kind of transited into social media. How do you see yourself on this platform? I think in the past, the media could frame you like we saw in 1990 in the way it wanted to, but now here you have a platform of your own. How did you come to this, either blogging or on Facebook?
I think we always want to secure our own means of self-representation, right? So I think disillusionment with the media is a starting point. Like, I don't want the media to represent me because I say things in interviews and sometimes it gets distorted, whatever. So I think social media has been very liberating for all of us in the way that we can present ourselves in the way that we want to, that we desire. I remember a long time ago interview with Life, and I shall not name names, but there was a journalist who asked me, who are some of your idols, who are some of the heroes? And I said, one of them has to be Lim Chin Siong, left-wing leader, Barisan Sosialis, right? And then she looked at me and she smiled and said, we can't print that, right? And I said, why? And she said, it's the Straits Times. And that was so I thought, if I need the things I say to be unfiltered, I think going to Facebook, whatever is, Of course, other people have other issues with their sense of not having filters, of course. There's another side also, right? I mean, if you're not going to filter the racist thoughts in your head, whatever, and go onto social media, then that's it for you. But I really did feel that Facebook allowed me that.
So how do you sort of handle sort of debate that happens on your wall, or in the comments responding to something that you've written that maybe doesn't sit well with some people, or
I have a lot of patience to really go down into the trenches of Facebook comment wars. I don't know where that comes from, but I do tend to engage rather than just to block or delete or whatever. And I realize that some of them have helped to clarify some of the things that I feel, have helped to sharpen the debate also. I mean, all these things have to be respectful, I think, at the end of the day.
And I think we were just talking about this as well, the artist as activist figure, not just a public figure, but advocating or supporting certain causes. how do you choose what to advocate for on this platform and what to fight for?
Yeah, it's I'm always a bit shy when people ask me whether I'm an activist, because I think compared to but it's a tricky question, because is there such a thing as cultural activism or cultural advocacy, right? Advocacy in the arts, right? So I think there are lots of activists who are doing amazing work, and there's a whole lot of legwork, there's so much sacrifices, in terms of, let's say, how much they're making, those are sort of very real sacrifices. Also, potentially running on the not so much on the wrong side of the law, but being, in the climate of fear, these are real things to you. Being blacklisted, for example, not being able to secure employment. So I really respect those activists out there. All I have to say is that I try to make contacts with as many as I can, and there's a lot, right? If you consider yourself like left liberal in Singapore, oh my gosh, there's, my feed, every day my Facebook feed is like, okay, should donate to this cause. So anti-death penalty is one thing, migrant workers is another thing, right? It's just a whole basket of things, which you realize is, wow, there's a lot of catching up, because civil society has been defanged, declawed, especially after, let's say, Operation Spectrum 87, right? That was, I think, one fell swoop. Don't get involved in civil society. Don't agitate for the rights of whatever minorities. But I think we're seeing a blossoming, a flourishing, and that's what happens, the return of the repressed, right? So that there's a lot of stuff, and I try my best to stay abreast of developments, but at the same time, it's hard. It can be overwhelming, and I try also in my work to try to give voice to some of these issues.
Okay.
I don't know whether that makes me a cultural advocate or whatever, but I do feel that the arts is part of civil society.
We've actually come to the end of my questions, but not the end of your questions.
Okay.
So I'm going to open up the floor for anything you'd like to ask.